Let's date forever. Here's your weekly dose of relationship fuel with Sammy and Nathan Yeager. Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about experiencing burnout and its effects, exploring and setting boundaries in your life, and doing the things that you love and outsourcing the things that you don't love. But before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
We are fresh off of the back of a visit from Sydney to South Australia.
Yeah.
So my relationship and network tank is feeling pretty full. We spent the last week or so visiting grandparents, parents, nieces and nephews, new babies.
Had a couple of special events in there as well.
Yeah, long-term besties who have had babies and renovated houses and moved and started businesses. Just amazing week or so, really nourishing that tank. So that's me. And then probably also, actually you might say this, so I'll ask you, what fueled you up this week?
Yeah, that definitely fueled me up as well, was catching up with friends, family, and yeah, just spending some really good quality time with some people that are really important in my life. The other thing that fueled me up was going to the car racing on the weekend. I have a very slightly bogan streak that comes out that comes out every now and then. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed going to the racing for a couple of days.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say the other thing that really fueled me up was our very impromptu fish and chips date night.
Ah, that was really nice too.
When we got home from our week or so away, neither of us felt like shopping, cooking, cleaning, dishes, any of that. So we just parked ourselves on the beach for sunset and had fish and chips, chatted, people watched, and sort of just reconnected after a really busy week or so. So that really fueled me up too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've got lots of fuel-ups this week because I just thought of another one in that we're doing a final little sprint towards our 23 goals for 2023, and we managed to achieve one of those today, which was our savings target for the year. So that was really exciting to see that goal come to fruition, and we will be doing a full review of all of our goals this weekend at our annual game plan, but we might touch on that in a later episode. But now let's dive into this week's ep.
Today we've got the lovely Mel Kettle joining us. She's a food-loving, book-reading beachgoer who lives in the Sunshine Coast. She's a trusted mentor to executives and leaders and a highly sought-after speaker and trainer on leadership, communication, and setting healthy boundaries. After surviving the debilitating effects of work-related loneliness, stress and burnout in her late 20s, Mel believes self-leadership is essential in creating real connection and sustained engagement. Mel has twice been recognised by Leaders Hum as one of the top 200 biggest voices in leadership, one of only 7 Australians on the list. She's an author of 2 books, the best-selling Fully Connected and The Social Association. She loves her work, her husband, and life in general. Welcome to the show, Mel.
Oh, thanks so much, Sammy. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's awesome to have you here as well. Yeah.
So your burnout story sounds a little bit similar to my burnout story, where I went at everything for the last few years of my 20s and arrived at 30 with absolutely nothing in the tank. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that story. How did you get interested in leadership and taking care of yourself first?
Well, burnout at 29 will do that to you, or did it to me, as you've probably found the same. I was working for a global marketing agency running all the events for Microsoft in Australia, and my team of 6 and I ran 300 events in 1 year. And anyone who's run events knows that that's an enormous number. So unsurprisingly, most of us crashed and burned within the year that we were there. And it just made me realise that life is really short. One of the things that I discovered about myself was that I didn't have a lot of healthy boundaries in place. I didn't have a lot of self-care practices in place. And so when work became really stressful, I didn't know how to cope. And part of that, I think, was because I was only in my 20s and I'd had a life up until then of uni, travel, lots of great times, and I'd never been put in a really stressful situation before. So when I was, my body and my mind slowly started to shut down on me. And it wasn't until I went to the doctors for some random thing and he said, "How are you?" And I burst into tears and cried for half an hour, like, hyperventilating, crying. And he said, "Let's just take your blood pressure." And it was so incredibly high. He told me that I had to make some major life changes or risk having a stroke before I turned 30. So very confronting. Yeah.
Gosh. And did it hit home? Was that like a line in the sand? All right, we're doing it now. Or did it take a minute to set in? And
yeah, it took a minute. I think that was probably in October of that year. And the November of that year, I was in Melbourne. I lived in Sydney at the time. I was in Melbourne running a week of events to do with Melbourne Cup Week. And my boss rang me when I was in the foyer of the Park Hyatt in Melbourne, which had just opened. And at the time, it was the fanciest hotel in Melbourne. It was on Oaks Day. I was full of society Melbourne in their finery. And when he rang and said, "How are you?" I became quite hysterical. I don't remember this. I sobbed and screamed and was hysterical. So he had to get on the other phone and ring my colleague who was somewhere else in Melbourne and say, "You need to get to the Park Hyatt now." But then, it still took a couple of months. But I did eventually resign, left Sydney, moved to Brisbane, and life's been pretty amazing ever since.
So what was that journey like from burnout? I know lots of people have, I feel like that terminology is almost overused now, where I think what you and I are talking about is like the end of the spectrum burnout, where there's health issues, where there's almost like workplace-induced anxiety, not sleeping, the whole plethora of things. We're not talking about, "Oh, I'm a little bit tired and I had a busy week." So I'm curious, like, what was your pivot out of the events industry? Because maybe to no surprise, that's also where I had started my career, project management, specializing in events, and then was running a global team. So
that industry has a lot to answer for. And I'm really sad to hear that about you, because my experience was in the 90s and you're quite a bit younger than me. So the fact that it's still happening is quite atrocious.
Yeah, it took a long time to like recalibrate, that's for sure.
Yeah, I reckon it took me 2 years to recover from that. I moved to Brisbane. I only had about a month off work because I was offered an amazing job in Brisbane the day I arrived in Brisbane as the marketing manager of the Brisbane Festival, so another big event. But the difference is that with the Brisbane Festival job, my boss was so nurturing and she was so conscious and aware of what happened to people when they weren't looked after. And so she looked after her whole team, and she did take on more stress than she probably needed to because she looked after us. But nobody in our team struggled with feelings of inadequacy, overwhelm, or overwork. And one of the things that I found really interesting is my first week there, I was still at work at 5:30. And in my second week, she called me into her office and said, "We leave work here at 5:00. And so please don't stay late, because if you are consistently working longer hours than we pay you for, then there's a fundamental problem and we need to address that." And that problem might be you've got too much work, you don't understand what to do, so you're faffing around and not doing what should be done, or I haven't explained myself to you, or you're bored and so you're just wasting time. But she said, "I really expect that nobody works overtime consistently, particularly in the early months of setting up the marketing comms for the festival month. Yeah, sure, there'll be lots of long hours, but that's expected, but not now." So that was just so polar opposite to my previous employer, where I worked an average of 75 to 80 hours a week. And so to suddenly have all of this extra time, I just didn't know what to do with myself. It was great.
But it's true, like when all you've done is work and spend the largest majority of your week working, it was probably quite a hard step to be like, "Oh, maybe I could catch up with my friends for dinner one night this week, or maybe I could go to the gym, or maybe I could take up that hobby." Or tell us a little bit about that process of like starting to heal and rediscover your relationship with yourself outside of working.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I moved from Sydney to Brisbane. When I moved to Brisbane, I had one really good friend in Brisbane, and I had an aunt who I wasn't particularly close to, but whose company I did enjoy. So, I couldn't spend every waking social moment with the two of them. Although my one friend who was here did introduce me to a lot of people. And I also met a lot of people in my job, some of whom, 23 years later, I'm still really close friends with. So that helped a lot. But I also, I had no hobbies. All I had done for the previous 3 or 4 years had been just work and work and work. And when I wasn't working, I was sleeping. And so I really had to, reflect and think through, what do I enjoy doing? Like, I didn't know what to do when I wasn't working. And so for the first 6 months, I became this is so embarrassing, I became addicted to Neighbours and E Street, because that was what was on TV when I got home from work at 5:30. And so I'd watch E Street at 5:30, the news at 6, and then Neighbours at 7. And after a few months of this, I thought, oh my God, these shows are crap. Why am I doing this?
The novelty is worn off.
The novelty has well and truly worn off. So I had to think, well, what do I enjoy doing? And so I had to find some hobbies. And I also, wanted to meet people and wanted to find a partner. And so I started just becoming more social and going out to places and meeting, going out with friends from work and going for drinks and saying yes to every invitation I got, because I never knew who I was going to meet at some of these things. And I was really lucky because I met some incredibly generous and kind people in my first probably even 3 months in Brisbane, who were really happy to introduce me and include me in their social circles. And that is not something that happens in every city in this country.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's definitely not. Yeah.
Nathan and I have a similar, we moved from Adelaide to Sydney, and it was probably first year of really getting out and trying to meet people and connect and find other people. And even now, we've lived in Sydney for almost a decade, and the majority of our close friends moved here from somewhere else, and they were looking to connect with other people and make friends and networks. It seems quite uncommon for a Sydney-sider born and bred to actually go out and actively look to meet new people, or at least that's been our experience.
Yeah, it's always pretty hard to break into some of those kind of existing social circles.
But it really does take one or two friends to then open up a floodgate of other networks and opportunities. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about quite a lot on this show, is how that relationship with yourself has then impacted the relationships that you have with other people, and in this case, friendships. But I want to go back to something that you sort of said there, and you've already alluded to your current age, so I feel okay calling it out. But that at that time where it was news, Channel 7 or whatever channel it was, Neighbours, Home and Away, whatever, there was probably a stopping cue where it was okay, I've watched this many hours of free-to-air TV now. Whereas today, you could jump on a streaming service and watch an entire
and unless Netflix prompts you
catalog,
to stop watching.
Yeah, exactly. But that's really interesting. The reason Netflix put that prompt in is because they know that people fall asleep. And Reed Hastings, in the early days of Netflix, came out at one of his investor meetings and said, our biggest competitor isn't the other streaming services. Our biggest competitor is that people do need to sleep.
Mm.
And so how bad is that Netflix acknowledges that their biggest competitor is needing to sleep? And you're right. I moved to Brisbane in 2000. And so the internet was fledgling then. Social media definitely didn't exist, which made it more difficult to meet people, because you couldn't just jump on, Twitter or Facebook and say, who knows people in this city, because they didn't exist.
Yeah. And I think that's the danger, isn't it? And I'm so guilty of this, of jumping on social media or on Netflix or some other kind of numbing escapism type behavior. And then all of a sudden, 2, 3, 4 hours have gone. And I'm oh, that wasn't very intentional about how I wanted to spend my time or energy at all. I want to applaud you that it was only a couple of months of behavior that you were okay, that's enough.
But even I just got bored. Even now though, I find it really hard to sit still and watch hours and hours and hours of something on Netflix or on another streaming service. I just get bored. And, Sean and I joke about how we must be the worst binge watchers ever, because we barely even make it through 2 episodes of something before saying, okay, let's go to bed.
Not me and Nath in our pandemic days watched Tiger King in one sitting.
Oh, look, that was different. That was a different time. There's some things that we watched much more focused on. But, for the average Monday night, I'm not going to be watching the latest episode of The Crown, for example. There's no way that I could stay up and watch all 4 episodes if they don't start till 8:30.
That probably brings me back to one of your earlier things that you mentioned, though, around boundaries. You said that when you were working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, that you were kind of struggling with boundaries. And it sounds like that when you did move to Brisbane, that just your work environment kind of set some really clear boundaries for you. But how did you kind of go about setting some of those boundaries for yourself, or realizing that boundaries were a bit of an issue?
One of the things that it set was time boundaries. So, there was a time that I was expected to turn up at work, and there was a window, but, it was like between 7:30 and 9. And then we were all expected to take a lunch break, and we frequently would have lunch together as a team, which forced us to get away from our desks. And then we were all, expected to be out of the office by 5:15 at the latest. And that was a really good reminder for me that life, there's a lot of other things that we should be doing in our lives. The other areas where I set better boundaries when I moved to Brisbane was around exercise and what I ate. And one of the hobbies I developed was around food, learning to cook differently and go to the farmers markets and entertaining more. Brisbane people back then would entertain more at home than they would going out, which was quite different from Sydney.
Yeah, where we're all in small, tiny apartments and we don't have space to host people over for dinner.
Yeah, I actually bought my first good cutlery set because I had my whole team over for dinner, and there were 8 of us, and had to borrow 2 chairs from my neighbour, but I had no cutlery. So I had to go and buy a good cutlery set, which I still have and use all the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting how our environments really can shape our behaviour. And that's definitely something Nathan and I have noticed since maybe 2.5 years ago that we moved to the beach, or 2 years ago that we moved to the beach, and how much that you can see how active just our community is. Everybody moves every day.
Yeah, same. We moved to the beach just under 3 years ago, from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, and the difference in attitude, in our personal physical and mental health has been enormous. But just, again, going out in the morning, going to the beach in the morning for a walk and a swim and a coffee, and seeing how many people are outside exercising. It's so different to Sydney and Brisbane.
Yeah. So, Mel, tell me, how did you make the pivot from the events industry into what you do now and helping people through like what you've uncovered and some of the tips and tricks you found?
It kind of evolved. So I went from conferences to the Brisbane Festival. That was a contract. When that finished, I just started temping, and I thought I need a real break. I was still recovering from my burnout. And so I decided that for between 3 and 6 months, I'd just temp. And I was happy to do reception work, data entry, anything that didn't require me to take any of my work home with me mentally. And it was on one of those jobs where I was working for this woman, and we were chatting, and she said, "Why are you doing this? You're far too intelligent to be doing basic data entry." And I said, "Yeah, but I need a break." And I told her what had happened. And she said to me a few days later, "There's this job going in another government department. My friend is the manager and she needs somebody with your skills." So I applied for it and got it. And then I got more and more experience roles in the Queensland public sector and just developed from there. And so I was in the Queensland government for about 5.5 years. And 17 years ago, I just thought, I've had enough of working for other people. So I resigned and started consulting, and best thing I ever did. And that's evolved as well. So I started out as a marketing consultant, and then I moved more into traditional communication. I did a lot of social media consulting. I would have been one of the first social media strategists in Australia, working with organisations to help them understand how they could use social media to create relationships and communities. And then I evolved from that into more leadership communication. So today I work with leaders and teams to help them communicate to create real connection and sustained engagement.
And can you tell us a little bit about your book, Fully Connected? I have a lovely copy here in front of me. Thank you. And there's one behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about this book? So Fully Connected, How Great Leaders Prioritize Themselves, Reclaim Their Energy and Find Joy. It's really what this whole show is about.
Yeah, thanks. So I wrote Fully Connected. It took a long time for me to write because it's a very different space to what I was known for. So it came out last year. And prior to that, I'd been really known for being a communication strategist, a social media strategist. And so I spent a lot of time thinking, who am I to write a book about self-leadership? And then I got out of my own way and did it. But I wrote it because I was working with a lot of teams, particularly communication and marketing teams and some senior leadership teams. And every single person I worked with was exhausted. And in particular, the women I was working with, most of the teams were very female-centric. All of the women, particularly those in their 40s and 50s, were just exhausted and feeling overwhelmed and overworked and really stretched. And a lot of that was because of just having to deal with children, big jobs, and in many cases, aging parents. Some of it was because of going through perimenopause and not understanding the impact that that was having on them physically and mentally. And a lot of it was just because life was busy. And so the thing that I saw the most and recognized the most was that so many people just seemed dissatisfied and unhappy. And I find that really sad because life is really short, and the last thing that you should be doing is spending all of your days in misery and unhappiness.
So tell us, how do we reclaim energy and find joy?
Oh, look, have healthy boundaries in place, know what your values and your priorities are, and do things every day to move you towards achieving your goals and priorities. And think about, what do you spend your time on? What is it that gives you energy, and where is your attention going? And, start with one healthy boundary. If you're finding, for example, that you're working long hours and you're never taking a lunch break, maybe start by taking a lunch break. If you're the person in your family who's doing everything, then have a look at what can you delegate to other family members. Do you have children who are old enough to do things? Can your partner do more things? Can you outsource and get people from outside of your home or your family to come in and do things? Can you outsource the cleaning or the ironing or the cooking or the shopping?
The thing that you don't like and aren't good at.
Exactly.
Start there.
Exactly. And the thing that it's cheaper for you to outsource than to do. The first thing I ever outsourced was my cleaning. In fact, when Sean and I moved in together, I said to him, there's a couple of not negotiables for you moving into my house. And one of them is that you pay 50% for a cleaner, because I am not cleaning after you. I'm happy to clean my house when it's only me, but not when there's anybody else there. And he was like, oh, okay. But he did. And that made such a massive difference, because it also meant we weren't spending a good chunk of every weekend doing all of the jobs that needed to be done that both of us hated doing.
Yeah. Nathan and I are occasional outsourcers of our home cleaning. It's like the deep clean. Like we do the week
very surface level clean.
But then every couple of months it's like, no, somebody needs to do light switches and inside door cabinets and all of the nitty-gritty stuff things. And I am always just blown away by the speed and precision and like maybe even like joy that other people derive from cleaning, because it's just not something that I particularly enjoy or am particularly good at. But yeah, for us, that's something that we would like to outsource more and more of as it becomes more of the right exchange, right? And I think that's what it is. It's like you're not actually paying for your house to get cleaned. You're paying so that you can have your Saturday morning back.
Oh, exactly. So one of the things that you said there is you don't get joy from cleaning. I don't either. But funnily enough, Sean does. And so probably about, 10 or 12 years ago, we were coming home from holiday and we needed to get a new cleaner. And we were on the plane coming home and I said to him, let's have a chat about, getting another cleaner. And he said, how much do we pay them? I'm like, oh, I don't want to tell you. He was an accountant. Like, I don't want to tell you. And then he said, what if I do it? And I said, tell me what that looks like. And he said, what if I clean the bathrooms and do the vacuuming every week? I said to him, if you can do it every week, if you skip an occasional week, that's fine, because, sometimes life just gets busy. But if you skip 2 weeks in a row, I'm getting a cleaner.
And I'll send you an invoice.
Exactly. At least 12 years ago, and he has not skipped 2 weeks that we've been home ever since. And, does he do it to the standard that I would love? Not always, but I don't care because he's doing it. And I don't have to.
I do think that's something. Nathan and I were having a conversation about this the other day about like the standard of care in your home or in the different areas of your life or your humming household. And that some weeks you actually just need to be okay with dropping the standard of care and be like, do you know what? That pile of laundry, that is going to stay there because I've got other priorities this week. Or we're eating from the freezer this week because standard of care, we're not cooking fresh every night.
Yeah. We do an eating from the freezer week, I reckon, every 6 weeks.
Yeah, and it can be really uncomfortable to let some of those things go too and not live up to your own artificial expectations or standards that you've put in place. Yeah.
Yeah, it can, but think about how you feel. Are you happier? Have you got more time to do better things or different things that, that are more important to you? And for me, if somebody wants to do a job that I don't want to do, then I'm all for it. And so long as they meet my basic expectations, then I'm good. But like you, there's times we just spend a weekend together and we'll just clean everything more deeply, or we'll get someone in to do that for us.
Yeah. I think it's just really about making that clear expectation that, all right, we're not going to do that this week. Like, we're letting that slip and that's kind of it. Whereas it's when there's the unmet expectations and you haven't communicated that, I'm not going to get to that this week. I think that's when you can have issues.
And that's exactly it. The more you can keep those lines of communication open and have honest conversations and setting the expectations early. Sean will often complain and he'll say to our friends, Mel is housework challenged. And I'm like, yeah, I am. And I'm proud of that. But
I'm good at a lot of other things.
Exactly. I set that expectation before you even moved in, that I am not cleaning a house when I don't live alone. And, occasionally I do, but, I do some of the laundry, I do the cooking and the shopping. And I feel that we've got, a fairly even distribution of the jobs that need to be done. But neither of us get too concerned or upset about it if something slips. If I can't be bothered cooking, then there's plenty of meals in the freezer because I frequently cook extras for those nights, or we can go out and just have a cheap and cheerful meal somewhere down the road.
Yeah, and I also just want to recognize the level of privilege that there is to be able to outsource things to another human being, to pay them for their time and their skills and their expertise. But it doesn't always have to be a human too. Like, you can outsource this to subscription services and automations and to Woolworths online delivery, or maybe it's about switching your groceries to HelloFresh every other week, because then you've actually outsourced all of the mental load of planning, shopping, meal prep to a service. So just, when we think about outsourcing tasks or changing them, it doesn't always have to be directly to another person.
But think about, what can you insource? What can you get people in your family to help you with? Or have you got friends you can do job swaps with? So before I met Sean, when I was single, I moved to Brisbane, one of my colleagues loved cleaning. Cleaning was the way that she released her stress. It gave her a lot of satisfaction to take something dirty and to make it clean. And so she would come and clean my house and do a deep clean of it probably once a month. And
where do I find that friend?
But in exchange, I would give her a week's worth of dinners. So for the next week, she didn't have to cook dinner because I had provided her with all of the food, all cooked. And I'd give her, I'd say to her, what do you want me to make? Here's a list of 10 things that I was thinking, and she'd pick 5 and I'd make them and give them to her. So, swaps like that can help as well, where you do the things that you love doing and give them to a friend and get them to do the things that they love doing that you don't in exchange.
Yeah, I love that idea. And that takes vulnerability too in your relationships, and to have some goodwill in the bank with your relationships and network, have some fuel in there that you can make that ask or make that suggestion too.
This particular friend, this just started out as me making a facetious comment, because she came into work one day and she said, and I said, how was your weekend? And she said, oh, it was great. She said, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Oh. And I said, what's great about that? That's my idea of hell. And she said, I absolutely love cleaning. And she said, I'm actually quite disappointed because I don't need to give it another deep clean like that for quite a few months. And I jokingly said, you can come and do my house. And she said, I would love to. How's the weekend? And I went, what can we swap?
Yeah, I love this idea. So, Mel, I want to ask, it sounds like at the beginning of your burnout, you had very little relationship with self, and now you've gone on a journey to rebuilding that relationship with self and putting some healthy boundaries in place. And it sounds like you're well and truly maintaining it, both in your relationship with yourself and your beautiful marriage with Sean. So what are some of the habits and practices that you've got now to keep your relationship with yourself fueled up?
There's a few things. I'm an introvert and I need time alone. And I know that if I don't get a certain amount of time on my own, on the daybed with a book, not having to talk to people every week, then I start to struggle. And so one of the things that I do is I build time into my week, and particularly to my weekends, to make sure that I've got time without commitments. So at least one day on a weekend, I'll have no plans. Or we'll have no plans other than maybe going to Pilates or, going for a swim, doing things together where we aren't required to make an effort. And that's come from, hard-earned experiences of not doing that. It's a bit trickier in the lead up to Christmas because there's a lot going on and I'm away. And which brings me to the next thing that I really do a lot is I travel. And, I travel for work and I travel for pleasure. And we've always believed in having separate holidays. If one of us wants to go somewhere and the other one can't or doesn't want to, then don't stop the other person from having that experience. And that started quite a few years ago now when I wanted to go to Europe to see my aunt who was living in Paris, and Sean couldn't come. And so I said, well, I don't want to not go. And so I just went on my own and it was fantastic. He does keep on threatening to go to New York without me. And I'm just like, yeah, that's never going to happen. So
He'll move heaven and earth to go with him.
Exactly.
All right. What are some of the things that you're doing in your romantic relationship to keep it fueled up? Because you've been married for quite some time.
Yeah. Technically, we're not actually married.
Oh, sorry. I should say been together
right.
for quite some time.
I call him my husband, but because I hate the de facto word.
Yeah.
But it's 20 years next year. And we did often say we'd get married on our 20th anniversary. But now that it's rapidly approaching, I feel like we've both changed our minds about that. Because we
no need to get the government involved.
Well, we don't see the need. But 20 years, it's a long time. And certainly it's had its ups and downs and it's had its challenges. He has a son who was 4 when I met Sean. And so there's been a lot of co-parenting issues and challenges and a lot of compromising that's had to be done for both of us. But I think the main thing that we do is we spend time together and proper time together, not just, when you're in bed at night, but we have dinner together and we sit at the table a couple of nights a week and we eat together. And Sean works shift work and part-time. So if he's at home during the week, then we'll have lunch together or we might go out for breakfast. We go for a walk nearly every day to the beach. It'll either be in the morning or in the evening. We'll have a coffee, we'll have a chat, we'll spend time together. And one of the things that I've found since we moved to the Sunshine Coast and we do this daily walk is that we just talk about so many more things than we ever used to. It's not just the, life admin conversations. We have many more deep and meaningful conversations about what our plans are for the future, what our hopes and dreams are, what we want to be doing. And I'm really grateful for that because life in Brisbane was a bit hectic and we didn't make the time for that, but now we do. And I can see that it's taken our relationship to a deeper level, which after nearly 20 years, I didn't think I'd say.
That's so beautiful. And that there's still more levels to go. But you said earlier, some weeks it's like, oh, we're just going to go grab cheap and cheerful dinner because everything else hasn't really clicked how we wanted it to or whatever the reason might be. But for Nathan and I, sometimes those things where it's like we actually did this last night where we just got home from traveling, fridge was empty and it was like the last thing I feel like doing is shopping, going home, cooking, dishes, not happening. So we just did impromptu grab and go, sat by the beach, and the conversations that we have when we're outside of our home in an environment like that are so different. So I think, it's a reminder that carving out that quality time, even if it is by accident or by being in a different environment, can be so nourishing.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that removing yourself from the environment that is where it's easy to fall into a rhythm and a routine Taking yourself out of that can be really liberating, both for you as an individual and for you as a partner in a relationship. We've just come back from 2 weeks in New Zealand and it rained for 13 of the 14 days we were there.
Oh.
So we did not quite have the holiday that we anticipated, but we did a lot of walking around the towns we were in. We did a lot of, I did a lot of reading. We spent much more time in an enclosed room because of miserable weather than we would have otherwise done. But that meant that we had many more conversations and different conversations. And so I'm really glad that that's how it happened.
And like we said about investing in the cleaner or whatever the thing is that you're outsourcing, really that is an investment in your relationship, because you get those few extra hours where you can have that intentional quality time. But I'm curious, is Sean an introvert as well?
No, he's an extrovert.
Okay, so same as us. I'm the extrovert, Nathan's the introvert.
Yeah, no, we're both sort of, if you look at the the introvert extrovert scale, we're both pretty much in the middle, but I tip into the introvert side and he tips into the extrovert side. And that was really obvious when he went from working in an office as an accountant, and he now works for Coles. And for a long time he was delivering groceries, which was a very isolated job. Now he works in a store, and so he has many more conversations during the course of a day. But when he was working as a delivery driver, he would come home and he would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I'd just be there going, I need silence because I've been talking all day and I can't deal with this.
The importance of self-awareness and understanding yourself and your partner. Mel, thank you so much for joining us and having this chat with us and sharing a little bit about your burnout experience and how you've turned it around and how you keep your relationship with yourself and your chosen person fueled up. To say thank you, we've provided a month's worth of early childhood education to a classroom in Kenya. This project's looked after by So They Can, and I had the chance to do a virtual tour of the school about a year ago, and it just warmed my heart so much. So yeah, quality education is important to you. It's important to me. So thank you so much for being here and allowing us to contribute to that project for you.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you, for having me on. It's been so lovely to get to know you a little bit more and to have this conversation.
Oh, no worries. So Mel, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how can they do that?
Through my website is the easiest way, melkettle.com. If you Google my name, I come up on the first, 4 to 6 pages of Google. Instagram, I'm at Mel Kettle. Threads, Twitter, I refuse to call it X. I'm at Mel Kettle pretty much everywhere. Social media, I hang out, LinkedIn and Instagram. But yeah, I'd love to connect. If you have any questions, please get in touch. Help if I can.
And where can people get your books?
Through my website, melkettle.com. If you're after an ebook, then Amazon, all the usual places. If you're overseas, then Amazon and all of the usual online booksellers is the best way.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks, Mel.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
This episode of Date Forever has been brought to you by Sammy Yeager and the Fueled Up Life Lab. If you want to learn more, come on over to sammyyeager.com, where you can access stacks of resources to help you fuel up your life and relationship. If you've loved this episode, share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an ep. Thanks for joining us and adding fuel to your tank.